Watching Kyle's unboxing videos again?
Yeah, he always finds the coolest... No way! A robot dog? Gotta ask where he got it.
Or use your Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Just draw a circle around the dog on your screen, and it shows you where to buy it right in the app.
Whoa, I just learned a new trick. And that for once, I beat Kyle to the next big thing.
Circle it, find it with the new Galaxy S24 Ultra and circle the search with Google. Get yours now at Samsung.com. Internet connection required. Results may vary based on visuals.
Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode 377 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. We're here for the good times. We're also here for the not so good times. And this may be one of those not so good times. I'm Jason Evans. I'm hosting this episode this fine Sunday morning on the heels of a late Saturday night loss for the Blue Devils to the Miami Hurricanes. We will talk all about it in a matter of moments. We will also preview what is suddenly a far more important game perhaps than we had thought coming up this week against Wake Forest. And to do that, I am joined, as I always am, by Sam Klein and Donald Wine. Sam, I come to you first. I like that you're wearing your Duke cap this morning.
Yeah, I'm trying to instill a bit of positivity. Donald's also got a Duke shirt on today. I will say that the best thing that I watched on TV yesterday is part 3 of the Beatles Get Back documentary, which I finally got around to. I hadn't over the last month. If you are somehow putting it off and you are any kind of Beatles fan, it is extremely fun. So I recommend watching the Get Back documentary because it'll put you in a much better mood than the Duke game did.
Yeah, Donald, how's your mood? Speaking of moods.
Well, I feel fortunate that I actually was not able to go down to Durham for this game. Because of the weather this week here in DC. And also as we speak, there's freezing rain. So getting back would have been an issue. So my friends and I actually decided on Friday not to go. And my streak still remains intact. Every time I've been to Cameron since I graduated college, I've gone once a year other than the COVID year of 2021. Every single time I've gone down there, I've seen us win. So I guess that streak's intact. But who knows what could have happened if I made it down.
Yeah, so let's get to what happened. The Blue Devils lose to Miami 76-74. By the way, before we even get to headlines or anything else, I do want to sort of shout out, tip the cap, whatever you want to say, to our preview of this contest, in which Donald, no, seriously, Sam is laughing at me, but hey, Donald quite accurately said that Miami was a team that was not afraid to take bad shots and make them. He pointed out that Charlie Moore of Miami has unlimited range and never saw a shot he wasn't interested in perhaps exploring. I said Miami was a great offensive team, but a really poor defensive team. But I was a little bit worried that they might get geeked up for this game and play pretty good on defense. Lo and behold, I think all those things are the story of how Miami beat the Blue Devils to some extent. So if you haven't listened to the recap, the preview was pretty, I don't know, I guess prescient, you would say. In any event, we should do things the proper order, and let's start with our headlines. Donald, what's your headline for this victory where your Miami team beat your Duke team?
Steals the name of the game as Hurricanes rock Duke.
I like that. That works. Hurricanes rock Duke. Little scorpions happening there. Sam, how about you? What's your headline?
I had experienced Trump's talent tonight.
Lots of T's there.
That's what I couldn't come up with something more clever, and I tried to wedge turnovers in there as well, but I couldn't figure it out. My creative side of my brain this morning wasn't quite up to snuff.
Yeah, so I also went to the T's. I did the alliteration thing, as I quite often do. Mine is turnovers and tough shots too much in Miami triumph. I think we've sort of heard what we all think was the story of the game, but before we get, and a lot of those are bad things. Let's get to the good first of all. Sam, I will come to you first. You had to see some positive from Duke in this game, right?
Yeah, I actually see a positive in the fact that Duke's bench is shortening. and that Coach K is figuring out a rotation that he really wants to rely on. We know that Coach K doesn't want an 8 or 9 man rotation headed into the postseason. And it feels like from the last couple games, we are getting to what Duke's rotation is going to look like down the stretch, which is the starting 5 that it's been all year, and AJ Griffin as the super sub. And Griffin he's continued to look really strong. Even in this game, there were those moments. He had a couple big shots. He plays really good defense. And the great thing about him is that he can come in and spell basically anyone else on the team and give the team a totally different look. So he can come in and take Mark Williams's place, which pushes Paulo to the 5 and plays sort of death lineup-y the way that Jason was explaining the other day. He can come in and spell Wendell Moore. He can spell Paulo Banchero. He can kind of do it all as a bench guy. And so it might end up being, I think if you want to take the most positive thing away from this week, where Duke did not, I think, have their best week of the season, AJ Griffin being the super sub and being able to give Duke all these different looks off the bench is actually a great development for this team and could lead to really great wins down the road where they're able to frustrate other teams who aren't able to prepare for all the different looks that Griffin gives.
So I've got an AJ Griffin comment, and I agree with you. I thought AJ had yet another really good game for Duke. You know, we talked a bit lately about the fact that he always seems to lead the team in plus minus. He didn't quite in this game. Wendell Moore was +4. AJ Griffin was +3. So AJ didn't quite lead the team in plus minus. He came very, very, very close though. But my AJ Griffin comment is this: I think that Duke needs to figure out, and we're talking about the rotation here, Sam, and you're very accurate in pointing out that Coach K has squeezed this down to pretty much a 6-man rotation with Joey Baker, getting 5 or 6 minutes. I think Duke needs to find a way to get AJ Griffin, Paulo Banchero, and Mark Williams on the floor together. Look, I know I'm the guy who touted, the potential of the death lineup where we go a little bit smaller with AJ at the 4. But I would love to see if we can find a way to get those 3 guys on the floor together, because Paulo is our best offensive player. I think Mark Williams is clearly our best rim protector, and in this game we had issues protecting the rim when he wasn't in there. And yet AJ brings, all these intangibles and all, I think he brings positives on both sides of the ball. I would just love to, especially I think last night when I feel like there were some guys who are really struggling, I would have loved for Duke to have figured out a way to get those 3 guys, who I think were 3 of the guys who were playing better than pretty much everybody else, into the game together. I don't want to name names too much, but Trevor Keels
I can say it for you, Jason. If Wendell Moore is the best ball handler on this team, and if AJ Griffin is the best shooter on this team, which we've been talking about recently, then both Jeremy Roach and Trevor Keels can spend more time on the bench. And
yeah,
and I'll get to the last minute of the game when we get to the bad, but that's sort of what you're looking at is AJ Griffin can fill in ways that makes this team like a little bit more dynamic, even if he's filling in for the guards.
I will say, though, I think the reason why you didn't see that as much last night is because I thought Trevor Keels was the most, comfortable with the ball in his hands for most of the game. Wendell Moore, you're right, is probably our best ball handler and at least our most versatile player. But Trevor Keels deserved to be out there last night, because there was times where when we needed to calm down, he was the guy that had the ball in his hands, and he was the one that was being much more comfortable with distributing the basketball.
Well, and it's worth noting that Trevor Keels, even though he was 2 of 11 from the field, he was bad when he shot the ball. And we'll get to his final shot before the game is over. That final shot though, wow. Okay, but Trevor Keels had no turnovers. And when we get to the bad, we're going to be talking about turnovers when we get to the bad, believe me. But we still need to talk more about the good. Donald, I toss it to you. What else did you have to say on the good side about Duke this game?
I think this is going to be very rare that this happens, because we're going to talk about some of the bad. And we're talking about this in the form of a loss. But Duke was better than Miami in the following categories: field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, free throw percentage, rebounds, and assists. usually you win basketball games when you're better than the other team in those 5 categories at the same time. So a tribute to, I mean, they had a couple of times where they went down early and then they had that 13-0 run in the first half. They went down a little bit in the second half. They also had another run. They kept sticking to what got them there. They also kept fighting to get back into the game. Even, I mean, we were inside a minute up 3 when the minute before we were down 4. They were able to climb back into the game at different stretches. They just weren't able to hold it off. So I will give them credit for sticking with it, trying to fight to get back into it. And even when things weren't going well on the offensive end, they still were able to outperform Miami in all those categories.
We talked in the preview about how Duke is going to have the advantage in this game on the glass, and how Duke brings Paulo and Mark Williams and Wendell Moore to the table, where Miami's guys just aren't quite at that level. And that exactly played out the way that we thought it would. Another big takeaway from this, I think, Donald, is that Duke is able to impose itself in the rebounding category, both at the offensive and defensive ends. Miami doesn't really go much for offensive rebounds, so they're sort of giving them up there. But even at the other end of the court, Duke was fighting for their own offensive rebounds when Miami was on the defense, and that played out well. And if the turnover margin was even a little bit more normal in this game, Duke wins. Still maybe a close one, but it could have ended up being a 6 or 7 point Duke victory without much difference in the stat line.
And another thing that I thought we did well on defense is that we did exactly, Jason, like we said in the preview. We forced them to take wild shots. Problem is they made a lot of them, and they made some at key moments. But that's something that is frustrating, but it's not something that is of concern, if that makes sense, right? Like you want to make it where you're forcing the other team to take bad shots. Now, if they go in, that's just, you kind of chuck that up and you say, hey, that's a W in the sense that you did what you were supposed to do, but it's a W for them as well because they were able to make the shot. So again, credit to the defense for making it so that Miami had to take some really bad shots and again, make some bad decisions with the basketball. They did have a couple of throwaways where, they tried to, the few times that Miami tried to pass it to someone else, it went out of bounds. So that's probably why our steals were down, is because they weren't passing the basketball after like the first 15 minutes of the ball game because they knew they couldn't against Duke's defense. Duke was really forcing them to make bad decisions. It's just that Miami got lucky a few times, especially in the second half.
So you guys stole my 2 things I was going to note as the good things from this game. The first was the rebounding, and I do want to point out some stats in that regard. So Duke wins the rebounding battle 44-30. Duke had 5 different guys get 6+ rebounds in this game. Miami had 0. Not a single player on Miami got more than 5 rebounds. And speaking of, stat stuffing a little bit, I did. There were 2 guys for Duke that I just thought had great, stat lines, even if, maybe one of them didn't have the greatest game. Wendell Moore had 12 points, 12 rebounds, and 7 assists. I mean, like, come on. That's a monster. He also had 6 turnovers. We're going to get to that a little bit later. But 12, and 7, big game from Wendell. And Mark Williams had 12 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 block shots. And Miami was utterly terrified to come into the lane and take a shot when Mark Williams was in there. Miami repeatedly, like Donald mentioned, they liked to do it on their own, not make passes. And they would come into the lane and put 3 or 4 fakes on, Mark Williams is there. They're pump faking him and he's waiting and waiting. He showed really good discipline. He's just a sophomore, but he plays with some degree of experience, I think, in there in terms of shot blocking. And I thought he did an outstanding job of controlling the paint when he was in there. There were a number of times late in the second half where I kind of wish that Mark Williams was in there protecting the basket. But we didn't have him in there. So, and then
wasn't there a time, I believe in the first half where Mark Williams on one end, he got the dunk and then like they immediately tried to run down and then they like looked back and they're like, all right, we have no one behind. Let's just go to the hole. And then they turn around and Mark Williams is standing right there as if he appeared out of nowhere. He like lightly again blocks the shot and kind of taps it to himself. And we go out on another run for another basket at the other end. He did that a couple of times, I want to say, during the game where he was able to make an impact on the offensive end and then immediately make an impact on the defensive end, or at least force a shot or block a shot, allowing us to go the other way. I wish we'd seen more of that last night, because Mark Williams is very good at getting up and down the floor, and when he's in that groove, it's hard. He's I won't say he's one of the fastest players on the court, but it feels like he is, because he can get up and down, and he knows that he has the opportunity to make an impact at both ends of the court.
Yeah. So gentlemen, if you don't object too much, I'm gonna get us over to the bad. And we're kind of going to segue here, because Donald was talking about something. He was talking about that Miami making difficult bad shots. It's something that he mentioned, as I said in the preview, and something that we saw again and again in this game. And and Donald, you also talked a little bit about Duke not getting a lot of steals, and Coach K talked about that, and I wanted to mention this. This is really interesting. He talked about the fact that Miami's a really good ball handling team, and that Duke didn't expect we were going to get a lot of steals against them. I mean, part of that is because they tend to just take it themselves. They create shots for themselves as opposed to passing a lot. And Coach K mentioned that Duke decided to play a half step off on defense. That we intentionally sacrificed our ability to get steals a little bit, because we were trying to prevent them from driving and also prevent them from getting backdoors. Miami's a team that loves to backdoor. And Coach K said, even though we were doing that, we got backdoored again and again in the second half. He was clearly frustrated about that in the post game. And he said that backdoor cuts like that are often a result of you being a little bit tired on defense, that our conditioning still isn't where it needs to be. And by the way, Coach K was absolutely right that we weren't going to get many steals. He said, because we stepped off, because we knew we wouldn't against Miami, we only got 2 steals against Miami. And I wanted to note not just Coach K's post game, but Jim Larinaga. He pointed out, this is really interesting. He was asked, hey, you got 4 out of 5 starters in double figures. Isn't that great? And he was like, yeah, that's fine, but I want to talk about the 5th guy. He talked about Sam Wardenberg, who only had 2 points. But Sam Wardenberg, their center, had 5 assists. Now, Miami only had 8 assists as a team. Really low number. They got 5 assists out of their center, because Sam Wardenberg would get the ball in the high post, and they would backdoor us again and again and again when he did that. And for a dude who only scored 2 points to find a way to help his team to win with assists, he also blocked 3 shots, by the way, Wardenberg. They only had 4 blocked shots. He blocked 3 of them. It's part of our bad, but part of our bad is that we allowed guys on Miami to excel. And it was somewhat frustrating to watch. And by the way, I knew Duke was in trouble in this game when it was tied at the half, and Miami was just like 1 of 9 or 1 of 10 on 3-pointers in the first half. And I was like, that's not going to sustain it. This is a good 3-point shooting team. That's not going to sustain itself. We're in trouble.
Yeah, you don't want to be tied against a team that has just played poorly. Right?
Exactly.
They came out and played better in the second half, and were able to turn up the pressure on Duke and make a few more shots, which was not encouraging. And Duke wasted a few opportunities right there at the end of the half. At the end of the first half, I think I should have been more worried. I wasn't thinking about it like that, Jason. I was just thinking, look, Duke can kind of cruise to the end of the half here, maybe be up a few points. And I didn't really think about the fact that they gave up a lot of easy baskets and didn't make any in return. So Miami went on a little run right at the end of the first half, which is what Duke should normally be doing to stretch the lead.
And I'll tell you, the other time I got super worried. In the second half, we started to get a lead. We were starting to stretch it out a little bit. And suddenly Isaiah Wong and Charlie Moore made just some ridiculous shots, step back threes and falling away. It just
one from 30 feet.
Yeah. And suddenly Miami tied the game up again. And it was, I didn't write down the exact time. It wasn't, I want to say it was around maybe the 12-minute mark or so. And I was like, oh man, I really thought, it looked like Duke was about to be up double digits and we were going to cruise. And suddenly this game's tied again. I was like, we're in real trouble now. And that's where Miami then really started to get the lead. Donald, take it a little bit. Let's talk more about the bad.
Yeah, I want to go back to Sam Wardenberg, because I thought he played very well. And you mentioned those backdoor passes. You mentioned what Coach K said about them. I was talking to my best friend last night, and we both kept saying it felt like we were playing in quicksand, where you just kind of, you knew your body wanted to go in one direction, but it was just going a slight half step slower. And because of that, Miami was able to get behind the defense time and time again and make layups. And when it comes to Sam Waterberg, if you recall, I mentioned he had been out the last few games. He came back against Syracuse midweek from COVID. Before that, Dengak was the guy that was kind of coming, was the starting lineup guy at the 5, and he played like 4 minutes last night because
he was a non-factor, and Wardenberg was great.
Yeah, they are a much different basketball team when he's in the game versus Sam Wardenberg, and it's clear because Dengak cannot pass. Dengak is not a force on the offensive glass, and he is not a force on the defensive end. He's just, they brought him at the end of the game because Mark Williams is 7'1" and Dengak is like 6'11". So they're like, okay, well, we got to put the big guy on the big guy for the last play of the game. But for the most part, he was a non-factor during the game. Sam Wardenberg really made a difference. And like you said, Jason, he had most of the assists, he had most of the blocks because he was, again, making an impact on both ends of the floor. And it just felt like our team knew what was coming and still was not able to react to it. And I think that is a credit to Miami and how they were able to execute, but also for Duke. Yes, they're still a little bit rusty. And I think Coach K said that many times last night. The word rust appeared in his press conference quite a bit because he was talking about how these guys just aren't back to 100% with the execution yet.
All right, Sam, I'm going to come to you for what I think is the big topic in the bad. Miami had 4 steals in the first 5 minutes of this game. They ended the first half. They had 11 steals in the first half. Duke had 13 turnovers in the first half, our worst turnover half of the year. Sam, God, what was going on with the turnovers? It was awful.
It was Miami displaying strength in their experience and having the game plan to know where Duke is going to be making passes, where they're going to be, trying to get clever with the ball down low. There were a few times where Duke would be driving into the lane and it felt like had kind of that downhill momentum. And this happened to a few of Duke's players. This is not, I don't think I need to single out anyone for Duke. There were a couple of times where the ball's going downhill and all of a sudden Miami knows exactly where to poke it out and exactly where things are going to get soft, where someone's going to leave the ball unattended as they're turning around to make a post shot or going in for a layup. So a lot of like end of the offensive possession where right before the shot, like a lot of them you could have classified as like pre-blocks was the feeling I had. And that's anticipation and that's game planning for Miami. And we talked about how their experience was going to be key here, that they know how to break down teams like this. And Duke played exactly into that. Duke did not take easy baskets in this game. And I mean, weren't making a lot from outside anyway, but not a lot of creativity on the offensive end for Duke, which allowed Miami to anticipate a lot of where the ball was going. And we've talked about how Duke hasn't made things easy on themselves this year with a lot of ISO in the offense and not a lot of good, crisp ball movement. We saw a lot of that last night where Miami was able to anticipate and get all those steals. And by the way, almost all of Duke's turnovers were steals. It was not Duke being sloppy. It wasn't like Duke was just throwing the ball away or traveling or something. It was Miami, having the game plan. And so you have to give some of the credit, I guess, to Coach Larrañaga for having those guys ready and having their hands in all the right places.
Yeah. So to put the numbers behind what you were just saying there, Duke has 17 turnovers on the game. 15 of the 17 turnovers were Miami steals. Wendell Moore had 6 turnovers all by himself, as I mentioned earlier. He spoke in the post game. Sam, I know you thought it was Miami, but Wendell said Duke was lazy, that they were sloppy. They made lazy passes. He said we dribbled the ball into double teams too often. We dribbled the ball off our legs. He specifically did that at one point, and Wendell called himself out for it in the post game.
He's got we've talked about how Wendell it seems like he's got his head screwed on the right way, and he's going to probably take more of his share of the blame than he needs to. I think this was Miami winning this game more than it was Duke. Obviously, when Moore is dribbling the ball off of his foot out of bounds, then yeah, that's him. But I think for the most part, maybe he wasn't giving Miami enough credit for how well they were prepared for the way that Duke plays offense, which is I've sort of been thinking about this the last few weeks. Duke is consistently in KenPom every week. The offense is rated a little bit higher than the defense, and that doesn't pass what I'm seeing in what I think of as the eye test. Like, I feel like Duke's defense
I
is
agree.
better than Duke's offense, but because it feels like the offense doesn't have as much flow, but that doesn't matter if Paulo Banchero can just ISO guys and hit shots from anywhere on the court over them. So we're kind of making up for a lack of really advanced, offensive skill, like as a team, by having individual offensive players who are so good.
You were talking about Wendell Moore and, taking responsibility and the such and not crediting Miami in the postgame. His comments, he was really harsh on himself. He said he takes full responsibility for this loss. He said he didn't lead the team late, that when we had, a lead in the final minute, he's like, as the team captain, as the most experienced guy, it's my job to make sure we get over the finish line in games like that. And I didn't. I was like, wow, Wendell was really, really harsh on himself. But before we get more to that final minute, because we're going to talk about that, Donald, I'm going to let you have a couple comments about the turnovers. God, it really frustrating.
Yeah, and really, when we're talking about some of these steals, I mentioned that we led Miami in assists, right? We had 19-8. There was a stark difference in how we were passing around the basketball and how they were. But that's also a reason why we only had 2 steals and they had 15, is because we were, at a certain point, Miami, as I mentioned, just said, nah, we're not going to pass the ball anymore. Whoever has the ball, is yours for the shot clock. Do what you want to do. And, Isaiah Wong, Charlie Moore, and even Jordan Miller, like Sam Wardberg, there wasn't a lot of passes going around on the Miami front. They were just trying to look to score. Cam McGusty was doing a lot of backdoor slashes, getting to the hole, scoring. So the idea is, when we were passing, there was a point where the pump fake should have entered the conversation, and we didn't do a lot of pump fakes. When a team starts to figure out where you're passing the ball, it's good to try and make it so that they have to keep guessing. And there was definitely times where we could have, as especially the ball was working its way around the perimeter, we could have taken the ball, pump faked it one way, and went back the same way, where a couple of guys would have been open for a shot. We didn't do that. And there was a lot of times where we would drive and do the dribble drive and then kick to the wing or kick to the corner. We were doing that just fine, but we were doing it in a way that made it where we couldn't pump fake, or we couldn't fake one way and go another way, because we were in the air or we were in the process of picking up our dribble. And because of that, Miami knew exactly where the ball was going to go, because there was only one way for the ball to go. So they were just able to take one step, be in that passing lane, and they were able to steal a lot of basketballs that way. So it's not, again, I think this is more execution. Miami did a great job on their end of figuring that out and stepping into passing lanes, and they were very good at being active on defense. On our end, it's about execution, always having it where you're in a position to do 3 things: dribble, shoot, or pass. And there's a lot of times where we reduce ourselves to one, which is the pass. And because of that, teams are going to be able to step into that passing lane and figure that out very quickly.
All right, guys, we got to talk about that final minute. Really, the final 30 seconds to me is the most significant part of it. Duke's up 3, 74-71. Miami has the ball. Charlie Moore just makes, and I'm sorry, like, you don't want to call it lucky.
It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly skill. There's tremendous skill involved in getting hit, falling down, and tossing the ball up and having it go in. But there's also a good bit of luck involved. But then he misses the free throw. Duke, on a day when Duke dominated the boards, we fail to get the rebound that mattered. And by the way, I think the reason, if you go back and watch, I hit the little rewind button on my remote about 5 times on that free throw. And to me, a lot of what happened was Sam Wardenberg, I don't want to say he fouled Paulo, but he sort of got tangled up with Paulo, and it prevented Paulo from getting that rebound. And as a result, Miami gets the rebound on the free throw. I can't believe they're like literally one of the worst rebounding teams in the entire conference. One of the worst rebounding teams we'll play all year. Offensive rebounding, at least, gets a rebound on a free throw miss in the final 20 seconds. Like crazy. So then Miami takes the lead, and then Trevor Keels takes what only can be called an ill-advised shot. When Trevor Keels put up that shot in the lane where he was moving, I think he was hit. He probably was anticipating getting a foul call. He had 3 teammates wide open on the perimeter. And in fact, AJ Griffin was standing in the corner with no one really close. And AJ's man had come into the lane to help on Trevor Keels. And AJ was right in Trevor's line of vision. I really don't know why. What probably should have happened in that play is that Trevor kicks it out to AJ. The defense goes to AJ, and AJ had a kick to, I believe it was Wendell Moore, who would have been able to, tie his shoelaces and check the wind speed before shooting what would have been a wide open 3-pointer to give Duke potentially the win, but didn't work out that way. All right, guys, the final minute. Sam, I'll come to you. Really frustrating. What was it more a function of Miami getting lucky or Duke executing poorly?
I think it's got to be Duke executing poorly in those last few seconds. If you took the numbers off the jerseys and we're just kind of watching that, you would think that Trevor Keels was the star of the team, given what a bad shot he took in those final seconds. Like, that's the kind of thing that like Michael Jordan and LeBron James are allowed to do because they're Michael Jordan and LeBron James. And Trevor Keels has been very good for Duke this year. I don't think that he's so far and away the best offensive player that he should be taking shots like that. To your point, Jason, he had options, and AJ Griffin's a better outside shooter. Paulo Banchero, like, why isn't Duke trying to get Paulo open in those final seconds? And obviously, you prefer to have the timeout, which Duke didn't have at the end of the game. And I don't, but the point being, that shouldn't prevent Duke from being able to run an offense at the end. Like they can do this in practice. They can work on, there's only a few seconds left in the game. It's under 10 seconds. You have the ball underneath. Now run up and make a play, get Paulo open for whether it's a three, whether it's him in the mid range. You've got to have multiple ways to get him or Wendell Moore or AJ Griffin open. And the offense at the end of the game can't just be Trevor Keels hero ball taking a mid range shot. I was really disappointed in that, and I don't mind it getting chippy under the basket when they were going for the rebound after the missed free throw, because that's what's going to, like, if the roles are reversed, Duke is going to play tough there too, and is trying to be physical, and the refs are not trying to call excess fouls at the end of the game there to slow things down. It's exciting to have it this way.
I'm just gonna first off chalk up that last play, the last minute, to just a bad omen. And that bad omen was our boy JJ Redick was in the building, and usually that is a nice welcome back. But even JJ missed a free throw last night, which, as we all know, he probably missed like 12 in all 4 years that he played in Cameron. He missed one that would have given money to the Duke Children's Hospital. That was the bad omen for the game. As soon as we saw that on TV, all my friends were texting me saying, well, if anything bad happens, it's because not even JJ can make a free throw, because everything was just sloppy on the night. But on that last play, I don't think Trevor Keels was destined to have that basketball because of the way the play kind of transpired. I don't think the play that was drawn up was for Trevor Keels to come out to 30 feet and catch the ball and shoot. I think he was one of maybe the third or fourth option on that play, and the first two or three were covered tight. And because of that, and no timeout, like you said, Sam, they couldn't just call a timeout and try and drop another play. They had to go with what was open. He was the only guy in that play that was open. So again, that's lack of execution. There was some people on Twitter kind of talking about why Mark Williams wasn't in the game on the free throw, but we should be able to box out on a free throw. Again, those sort of things. And then right after that, Cameron McGusty getting the ball and then just slashing to the rim and just somehow getting the ball over everybody, and it arcs in. Those are things that, again, you wake up on the wrong side of the bed. JJ Redick misses a free throw in Cameron. Things like that happen in the final minute. I'm not using it as a big cause for concern. I just think the rust is still there. The execution's still off. And those are small things that cost us this basketball game. I will say, Jason, your favorite stat that you always like to talk about, field goal attempts. We had 11 fewer attempts at the basket than Miami did. We only lost by 2. Why? Because we had 17 turnovers. If we have half of those, if we have 5 less, we probably win this basketball game.
The point about rust, Donald, I think is important, but I don't think it can explain enough about how, like, Duke had a clear talent advantage in this game and had gotten the chance to shake off the rust a little bit with a game before this one. So I don't want to keep making excuses for them after it feels like they've gotten back into the rhythm and after they've figured out sort of what the rotation looks like. I think that's an excuse for 2 weeks ago, not for yesterday.
Okay, well, with that, no more excuses. The Blue Devils have taken their first ACC loss, just their second loss in the season. But you know what? Hey, newsflash, the season continues. It's just one game. Sky has not fallen. We will be back in action. Blue Devils will on Wednesday against Wake Forest. We will have a preview, and boy, have we told you our previews. We predict things. We know what's going to happen in these games. Our preview of the surprising Wake Forest Demon Deacons coming up right after a quick break. Okay, and we're back from the break, and it's time to look ahead to the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, a club that has been probably the most surprising team in the entire ACC this year. They currently stand at 13-3, 3-2 in the ACC. They look like they were swooning a little bit early in the ACC schedule. They dropped 2 games to Louisville and Miami, and you sort of thought, oh, maybe this, maybe Wake was an illusion all along because they were 11-1 to start the season. But they righted the ship in this past week, and they beat both Florida State and Syracuse. Beat Florida State pretty handily, beat Syracuse in overtime. So Wake now stands at 3-2 in the ACC, 13-3 overall, like I said. And I'm going to go to Donald first and let him tell us a little bit about what we need to look forward to against Wake Forest.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things, right? They've had some key wins, which is, we talk about the ACC. We've talked about how down it has been so far this season. And key wins are things that are hard to come by. And Wake Forest has quite a few of them. Florida State, as you mentioned, Syracuse, as you mentioned, they also beat the brakes off Virginia Tech back in December, and they beat Northwestern in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. So we are looking at a team that can play basketball. They've had some key wins. They've also had some pretty difficult losses. LSU was one. They barely lost to Louisville, and they had a shootout with Miami last weekend and lost in that game. I'll go back to that Miami game because I think it was important. There's a lot of things that they did in that game that we should look for in this game. One thing is they don't quit. Alondes Williams is terrific with the basketball. He's going to fill it up. He's going to score points. And when it comes to him and when it comes to Jake LaRavia, those guys are going to have the ball and they're going to try to go to the basket. Alondes Williams leads the team in points, rebounds, and assists. And when I say that he is a guy that you want to watch out for, they really need to do their homework and be ready for him. The one thing that Wake does, though, that they did a lot in Miami, maybe that's a product of Miami, but it also is something that they do from time to time. Whenever the opposing team makes the basket, they are going hard the other way. They do not stop. They are not one of those teams that casually takes the ball out and looks to establish an offense. They're looking to go right back down and put it right back in your face. So we need to watch out for that. Transition defense. And transition doesn't necessarily mean when we turn the ball over. It means at any point when the ball goes into the basket or we lose possession of the basketball, we need to make sure we're hustling back, because that is where Duke has been a little shaky this week, has been in that transition. And just on defense, again, quicksand, step slow, half step slow, mind, body, spirit, all that things. Wake is going to try and take advantage of that. So we really need to watch out for that. And also really think about Wake is they do take a few threes. They aren't great at making threes. I believe they shoot like 33%. Jason, I know you talk more about that, but they're going to try and spread the floor out because they want not necessarily to shoot the three, but they want to be able to drive to the basket and they want to be able to score inside. So we need to watch out for that and make sure that everybody, our perimeter is tight, but really our inside presence. Again, we should out rebound them. We should be pretty good against Wake Forest in doing that. And really the emphasis is going to be on making sure we establish that rim protection. Mark Williams is going to be important. Honestly, want to call out Theo John and say, I need him to be big this week, because when he's in the game, I don't need it to be a step down and where guys think that they can go to the rim again. Be the rim protector that you can be, that we've seen so far this year. Theo John needs to step up and this week be that guy that when Mark Williams comes back in the game, they go, oh man, we just got done with this guy. That's what Theo John needs to focus on. Paul Banchero needs to focus more on defense as well. But those three, if they can really establish the paint and say, hey, this is our paint, you're not coming in here, Wake Forest is going to have a long day.
So let's talk a little bit about Wake Forest advanced stats for a moment, because this is a team that, they're one of the most surprising teams in the country this year. There's no question about that. They were not expected to be nearly as good as they are. Ken Pomeroy says Wake is the 53rd best team in the nation. He has them 49th on offense, 67th on defense. So they are, sort of equally reasonably good at both ends of the floor. This is a road game. This is, after Ohio State, this is Duke's only second road game of the season. And with Wake being as good as they are, this is a quad A opportunity for Duke. And Duke doesn't have a ton of quad A opportunities on this season. That both means it's going to be a tough game, and it also means it's an important opportunity and really important for Duke's resume. Wake is a super experienced club. Of the 6 guys who play the most minutes for them, 5 of them are seniors and 1 of them's a junior. This is going to be, we're playing against men here. These guys really know what it takes to win a college basketball team. They are.
Do you think, Jason, that the game against Miami is a bit of a preview for Duke in terms of playing experienced guys?
Yeah, exactly. It's and playing, not entirely the same, but somewhat similar styles, in that Wake is also a team that likes to take the ball to the basket. They work really hard to get a good shot. This is, I was stunned at this stat when I looked it up. Wake is the 4th best 2-point field goal team in the country. They hit almost 59% of their 2-point shots. That is super impressive. This is a team that doesn't take bad shots, and they're not a great offensive rebounding team, but they don't have to be if you're going to hit 59% of your 2-point field goals. They are a good defensive rebounding team, and like I said, with an experienced team, it's like they know they don't need to waste energy trying to get offensive rebounds they're not going to get. But when it comes to defensive rebounding, they work hard, and it's worth noting they're not small. For the first time, in a little while, Duke's playing a team that has some legit size. They've got a 7-footer. They've got 3 or 4 other guys who are 6'8", 6'10", and Duke will quite frequently, most of the time, Wake Forest has 3 guys over 6'8", or 6'8" or taller, I should say, on the floor at the same time. So, usually Wendell Moore is guarding a guy significantly smaller than him, and that is not going to be the case in this game. It's going to be very interesting to see how Duke tries to match up with this team, and this Wake team. The last thing I'd say about them is that they don't turn the ball over very much. Like Donald said, they hit about a third of their threes, which is okay, but they don't shoot a ton of threes. They're sort of right in the medium kind of area in terms of shooting threes. Everything about them screams, we're experienced, we know what we want to do, and we're going to make sure that we do the things we want to do. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, Donald mentioned Alondas Williams. There may not be a more improved player in the country this year. If you look at what that guy was at Oklahoma last season, he's a transfer. Last season at Oklahoma, he averaged 6 points per game, 2 rebounds per game. He hit less than 20% of his threes. He averaged less than 2 assists per game. He was a non-factor at Oklahoma, and he has turned into an absolute beast at Wake Forest. 20 points per game, 6.7 rebounds, 5.1 assists. The ball is in his hands. He's making all the decisions for them and doing it right. Sam, talk to me. I know you want to look specifically at the players. You got to start with Alondas Williams. If Wake's the most surprising team in the conference, he might be the most surprising player.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, a transfer from Oklahoma, that is the theme for Steve Forbes' team. Almost all of their rotation guys are guys who they picked up on the transfer market. Isaiah Mucius is back. He's a homegrown guy. Carter Witt is a local guy. He's from the Triangle area and is playing at Wake. But basically every other contributor either transferred in this season or last season. Duke fans will remember Davian Williamson, who's still around. He had been a transfer last year. And then when you look at the rest of the starters and the key rotation players for Wake this year, they're all transfers. Alondas Williams, as you mentioned, transferred in from Oklahoma this season. Jake LaRivia comes from Indiana State. Dallas Walton and Kadeem Sy are both big men. As you mentioned, Wake's got size. Walton is a 7-footer who transferred in from Colorado, and Sy comes from Ole Miss, although he had been at Virginia Tech. So he's at least a little bit familiar with the conference from a few years back when he was a freshman. But Steve Forbes has done an excellent job of rebuilding this roster quickly through the transfer market. We've talked about how different the transfer portal makes college basketball recruiting. And we talked during that mailbag episode recently about how, should Duke be pursuing more players on the transfer market, or what's the effective difference of getting transfer market players versus guys out of high school? And given that Wake Forest has played, pretty well this year and is one of the better teams in the ACC, I don't know that they're definitely making the tournament, but the fact that they're more competitive this season shows how effective you can be at getting that experience. And Jason, you mentioned it's a lot of experienced guys. It's sort of a double-edged sword, because yes, there's a lot of college basketball experience, but it's a lot of college basketball experience playing in different conferences. You have a Wake Forest team that's made up of guys who've spent most of their time pretty much all playing in different conferences, one from the SEC, one from the Big 12, one from the Pac-12. So I think that's what's really fascinating to me about this Wake Forest team is the size and the way that Steve Forbes has kind of rebuilt the roster and turned it into a really different looking team than it was previously. Davianson and Mucius were two key players for them last year. Arguably now they're like, the third and fifth best players on this team. And that really speaks to Steve Forbes's, roster building ability.
All right, with that, we're done with Wake Forest. And guys, before we roll, we do have to pick a player of the week for the Blue Devils this week. Donald, I'll come to you first. Who you got? Who is the guy you want to point out as the player of the week for Duke this week?
I'm going to go with Paulo Banchero. I think in a week where we struggled on the offensive end at times, he was a guy that was not struggling this week. I believe he had 37 points combined on the week. He also was great on the glass. He had grabbed a lot of rebounds. I thought he just had a presence throughout the week that we have come to expect from Paulo Banchero. So I'm going to give him my player of the week.
Sam, your turn.
In an underwhelming week for Duke, I just can't bring myself to give it to any of the stars. Like Donald mentioned, Paulo Banchero, he turned the ball over 6 times across 2 games. And there are other guys that struggled with turnovers this week, but I just am trying to hold him to a higher standard. I'm trying to do the same thing with Wendell Moore. They were both Naismith Award finalists as announced earlier this week, and which I think is only like 25 or 30 guys on that semifinal list.
Yep.
So I want to hold Paulo Banchero and Wendell Moore to National Player of the Year, All-American type expectations. So I just can't give it to them this week. I'm going to give it to AJ Griffin, who I think I'm on a streak now with, where, he continues to only play in that 20 to 25 minute range. So he's still decidedly the 6th man. He's not, maybe he's now getting like closer to Mark Williams's minutes, but in that time, he's hanging on to the ball better. He's one of Duke's most efficient offensive players, especially this week. And I don't think was as responsible for a lot of the sloppiness that we saw yesterday against Miami. So I've got AJ Griffin.
Yeah, Sam, you took the words out of my mouth. I was also going to take AJ Griffin, and I was also going to note that even though his stats were impressive this week, he scored in double digits in both games. He's grabbing a lot of rebounds. He's doing all the little things. He's efficient on a team that has struggled with efficiency. If you extrapolate AJ Griffin's all his stats, if you say, okay, what would he be doing if rather than playing 22, 24 minutes, he was playing 32 or 34 minutes, your eyes start to pop out. He'd be scoring 15 plus points per game and grabbing like 8 rebounds per game. I mean, really impressive numbers. If you extrapolate it out, he is super efficient in the time that he's playing, and he's playing some of the better defense, especially help defense, I think, of anybody on the team. I also I kind of looked at Mark Williams, who's another guy who I like I said earlier in the podcast, I want us to figure out a way to get AJ Griffin, Mark Williams, and Paulo Banchero on the floor together. And it's really tough. But hey, I'm not getting into that now. We're into player of the week, and AJ Griffin, I think, was my pick as well. Sam, Donald, nothing wrong with picking Paulo. He was also in contention for this award. All right, so with that, guys, we're going to wrap it up here on this edition of the DBR podcast, number 377. We will be back if there's major news before the Wake game. If not, we'll come at you after the Wake game on Wednesday. Until then, please reach out to us. dbrpodcast@gmail.com is the email address. We'd love to hear from you. Heck, we'd love to hear if you think we should be playing those three guys I just mentioned on the floor at the same time. And also like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That way you can get every edition of the DBR podcast downloaded to your device as soon as we put them out there. That's what you want. You want to hear from us quickly. I know it. For Donald and Sam, I am Jason. Thanks a lot for joining us. It's time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home. By the way, did y'all see how far Duke fell in Ken Palm?
Right?
13.
Wow. We fell to number 13.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you lose to a team you're not supposed to.
Did not like the home loss to number 92 Miami.
No.
Ken Palm was not a fan of that.
Nope.